The hunt for the next head of the Fed is underway.
What the president really wants, and I want the exact same thing, we want a Fed that focuses on three things: stable prices, full employment, and inflation. Why? Because inflation is how we determine the interest rates. Inflation today is at 2.7%. Our interest rates should be coming down, but they're not. Unlike EU and most parts of the world, it's been stubborn.
The next central bank chief won't be Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He's out of the running. But President Trump says that he has a list of 4 candidates to lead the Fed when Jay Powell's term ends next year, 9 months. We're counting the days. And that includes the 2 Kevins, National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett and a former Fed Governor, Kevin Warsh. Larry Kudlow, I hand the floor to you, dear sir. Do you know who it is?
I do not. I do not know who it is.
Who would you pick?
I'm not going to say. I do want to say Scott Bessent took himself out. The script there suggested that he was taken out. He talked to President Trump, and they both like him at Treasury, and I couldn't agree more myself.
Indeed.
He's doing a great job over there. And I don't really think there are 4. I think there are 2 candidates. But let me say, it's a little nuanced, okay? You have this open seat for 4 months, the Kruger woman who's gone back to Georgetown or wherever she goes back to. Now, I would recommend to the president that he put in whoever his chairman's choice is going to be into that seat. And then the seat will be confirmed and reconfirmed next year sometime. I think that's the best thing to do. I would not wait, okay? There's a possibility that the president would put in someone else like for 4 or 5 months, which I think is a waste of ammunition, to be honest with you. Put in who you want to be chair. That will essentially crowd out, almost blow up Jay Powell's term as chair, okay? And change the whole dynamic of the board, because you already got Chris Waller and you got Mickey Bowman in there. And look, Hassett is a brilliant person. Warsh is a brilliant person. They're both people of enormous stature. And so they will really start running things on a de facto basis, okay? They will, and there's nothing Jay Powell can do. Jay Powell can speak, he can go up there at press conferences, but you'll have a second press conference. Everyone will want to know what Kevin Warsh wants or what Kevin Hassett wants, more than they want to know what Jay Powell wants. And that's a good thing, because as we've discussed many times, Powell's policy, I believe, is standing in the way of the Trump boom. Right now, it's standing in the way. The interest rates, as Chris Waller has said, and he's a real smart guy, we're at least 150 basis points too high on the federal funds rate. Given an economy which is not fabulous at the moment, as I say, housing is slumping, private employment is slumping, it's a very zigzaggy economy. It's got the potential to be fabulous, but we could use a little help on interest rate. So summing up, put your heavy hitter in right now. Just like do it today's Thursday or Friday. What day? Today's Wednesday. Thursday or Friday. Put it in. Warsh or Hassett. You can't lose either way. They're both brilliant. You must redo the Fed. Top to bottom. Yeah. It's what Scott Bessent said. It's time to look at the Fed needs a thorough audit. It needs an audit of monetary policy. It needs an audit of the models that don't work, the econometric models. It needs an audit of bank supervision and regulation policy. It needs an audit of the district Federal Reserve banks, which are getting away with Lord knows what. People don't even know who these people are, but they vote on the FOMC. You need to run, you need a thorough doging of the Federal Reserve. I just made that up. A federal doging of the Federal Reserve.
I'm going to
add. Is that good, David?
I love it.
I mean, really?
I love it. You know, although I have a different view of what might be done. But
I would just like to add to that.
Yes.
That investors and the markets need to have a cleansing moment, because there also needs to be a mission audit, because the Federal Reserve doesn't have a dual mandate anymore. Since the 90s, really with Greenspan, long-term capital management bailout that was cobbled together, even though it wasn't a direct Fed bailout, if you will, the Federal Reserve has turned into a disaster relief organization. It is an economic FEMA, and it stands by at the ready to swoop in and fix all of the gambling losses of the reckless reprobates in markets around the globe. And that's what the markets expect. And they have been led to believe that's what's going to happen, from a Bernanke to this jackleg who's running it right now. And that has to change. So who wants it? Jump ball.
Formally, by the way, they have 3 targets. Three. Used to be 2. Should be 1, price stability and a sound dollar. But that's too easy. But on top of that, they have low unemployment. But on top of that, they have something that's called moderate interest rates. Don't forget that. If you ask me what that means, I have no idea.
Tim Scott got it right. I didn't.
I'm just saying, Tim Scott's a smart guy, chairman of the banking committee. By the way, he's a Jack Kemp supply sider. That's how I first met him 25-something years ago.
By the way, Rand Paul went one step further, and I think he surprised me. I don't know if he surprised you when you were interviewing him. And he said basically the Fed should only have, this is what Bob Bartley at the Wall Street Journal used to say, basically the Fed should be have one duty, and that one duty should be a lender of last resort.
Oh, I thought you were going to say.
That's why you need a central bank, just if in case there is a financial crisis. But then it kept getting more and more and more and more as it went along.
I thought you were going to say one duty to drink Kentucky whiskey. Because he wants to talk about that. He's very concerned about tariffs.
But he really wants to limit what the Fed does in our
I have to think about that. I mean, somebody's got to control the money supply, don't they?
Well,
you have a money supply.
The market is controlling interest rates better than the Fed is doing.
That I agree with. I agree. Market
so at least
rates.
get them out of the interest rates.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, Steve Forbes is always right. Steve wants a gold price rule. Look, I'm sympathetic to what I call a commodity price rule, which was what Wayne Angel argued for years ago. Wayne was a dear friend and mentor of mine. You know, you take your CRB index, it's got 20 commodities, farms and industrials, it's got oil, and it's got gold and silver in there. That's an important guidepost. Right? And Kevin Warsh is very sympathetic to a commodity price rule, I might add. But just mainly to all the criticisms with which I probably agree, get it done this week. Put your top dog right in there. And I think, get it over with. And I think markets will respond very favorably. I think both of those guys will do very well in the market.
Put some hot breath on the back of the neck of Jay Powell, figuratively. I mean that.
And Trump kind of took him out of the Taj Mahal thing, which I thought was very amusing. Jay looked like he needed an emergency hit at the bathroom. But
I was sick all last week, and I probably watched that video of President Trump touring that construction site with that jackleg currently running the Fed 50 times.
Well, you shouldn't personalize it.
Yes, I should.
It's not.
You're a better person than I am. I will personalize it all day long.
Did you see Trump on the roof of the West Wing yesterday?
Yes.
I just lost that.
Yeah, he's serving in the new ballroom
Joe
space.
Joe Biden couldn't even walk 3 steps without the help of the Secret Service. Here's Trump dancing around the roof of the West Wing. By the way, my old office was on the 2nd floor. It's not easy to get on the roof of the West Wing. And he's up there with a group of people figuring out how they're going to reconstruct it.
Right.
Got to give him credit. Energy. Remember Alexander Hamilton, who you knew well, okay? We liked him a lot when we met with him for lunches and dinners. Hamilton always argued the executive should have energy. It's right there in the Federalist Papers. It's very important. This executive has a lot of energy.
What can I just an alternative to your suggestion?
Sure.
What about somebody that we both know and love, Judy Shelton, who's a genius, who you tried to get on the Fed.
I did.
You did God's duty and tried it. Didn't
Republican senators double-crossed
Well, you got to
me.
tell us someday who that was that was double-crossing.
I'm going to
we want
maybe
names.
not
We
today.
want names. All right.
At
any rate,
y'all come on my show and do names.
What about having Judy go in to replace Kugler? But announce at the same time that you want Kevin, we'll just say
You
Kevin,
may not have
writ
another
large,
opening in the board.
to do the big
You
job
may-
eventually.
Technically, if Jay Powell decides to be even more stubborn than he is today, his board seat goes on for quite a while.
Yeah, it goes
and
on
you
until
have to,
28.
2028.
Yeah.
God help us. And I'm just saying, the chair must come from one of the 7 board seats. So you're taking a risk.
Gotcha.
You're taking a risk.
Gotcha.
I would love
That's
this.
a good point.
There will be openings. The guy who ran all the DEI supervision, Barr, I believe his name is. William Barr, I'm not sure what his name is. I don't mean the Attorney General, but his name, B-A-R-R. People are telling me he's going to leave pretty soon, too, because he sees the handwriting on the wall. And I'm sure there'll be others, too. But right now, I would not risk anything.
Got you.
Put your guy in there. I mean, I'm saying it's those 2. Maybe there are other names. Lord knows I could be quite fallible on that point. But at least whoever he wants as chair, put it in this week, tomorrow or Friday. Please, Mr. President. Sorry.
Jackie, jump in. Y'all get in here. Jump in.
Well,
Go ahead.
What about the regulatory functions of the Fed? What do you think of that, Liz?
I don't think much of it.
capitalization? No.
I don't think much of it at all. I do, however, have more hope because Mickey Bowman, is now the vice chair for supervision, which we all pushed so hard. She's wonderful. She's terrific. She was like the Small Bankers Association years ago. She's a Kansas entrepreneur. You gotta love that. And Jay Powell did everything he could to stop her appointment, but it's a Trump appointment. And so I think that will improve. But I think supervision and regulations, once upon a time at the New York Fed, I actually worked in the bank supervision area as a special assistant to Fred Shadrach and then Paul Volcker, who was president. That needs audits and repairs. Thank you very much. Audit and lots of repair.
I don't know how you repair the moral hazard that central bank, though, has built up over 30-plus years, where, again, if anything goes wrong in the economy, anything goes wrong with one investment bank, boom, people expect that balance sheet to get blown out. $9 trillion is the high. Give me 15. Give me 20. Yeah. That's what the expectation is.
You know who was very good? I'm going to defend, I'll defend Volcker. He went a little too far at the end, but I'll defend Volcker, who conquered inflation. And I will also defend Greenspan, except the last couple of years weren't his best. But he served 3 terms, and under Alan Greenspan, for the better part of 20 years, we had strong growth with low inflation. I mean, it was really terrific.
And Volcker worked as a partner with the president. This current Fed chief seems to want to be
hostile.
Hostile.
You're exactly right. It's like it's not about Fed independence, right? It's about Fed hostility. I was talking to Victor Davis Hanson about that on the show last night. You're exactly right. It's not. He called Powell aggrieved or something. Victor's much smarter than the rest of us, including me.
I want to get
I'm sorry.
Jackie.
Go ahead, please.
Where was Paul?
Listen,
I want to get Jackie in here.
I actually am just enjoying listening to this conversation of somebody who's studied the Fed as long as you have, and you as well, David. You know, there are times that we talk about certain topics, and I don't have expertise to specifically add here with respect to the history and the evolution, but I would say that I'm watching Jerome Powell in this current capacity, and it's difficult to watch. It feels like a train wreck. It feels like he's sort of assaulting the American people because of his grievances, and that just feels really unfair.
It's funny, going back to, Greenspan wasn't afraid to complain about the size of the federal budget deficit when the economy was doing well. And here we have Jerome Powell. We're out of the COVID recession. We're doing well. And yet he's not saying anything about that federal budget deficit ballooning to 6% of GDP, ordinarily associated with a recession or a war. That got to me. And then later on with Trump, with the tariffs, oh my goodness, he couldn't stop complaining about tariffs.
Well, he accommodated and monetized Joe Biden's spending and borrowing.
Yes.
And the money supply got as high as 30%, M2. And as you know, the inflation rate got to 9%, actually cumulatively 20%. But then when the Republicans came in, all of a sudden he starts belly aching about tariffs and getting into areas he doesn't know anything. He doesn't know anything. You don't think he knows much about money. He knows even less about trade.
Well, he's a jack leg who's a jack jaw.
What is a jack leg?
A jack leg is somebody who's just useless. And then a jack jaw, my father came up with it, is somebody who just runs their mouth too much. You know, like a jackdaw is like you pull a post out of the ground, but somebody who runs their mouth like this too much. So I want inscrutable, like Alan Greenspan, somebody who's kind of taciturn and inscrutable. Nobody can understand what they have to say.
I'm just worried about one thing.
With Dagan something?
I get
You
her
need a
now, so
translator?
I totally get it.
I'm going to work on it.
I'm
gonna
concerned
take
about
notes
one
and stuff.
thing that I hear from investors, people who have invested, for example, in real estate, and they have adjustable mortgages, and the mortgage rates have gone up now, and they've been sitting with them for a while, are saying that if the pressure doesn't ease soon, they will default on their loans. Trump is a real estate guy. I know that he must know that that's happening in the marketplace. I also feel that's partially why Powell is pushing back and not lowering rates for this reason. It's almost like he wants to see some sort of a blow up happen.
Yeah, it's gross.
You talk to John Katzimatidis about commercial real estate. You hear the same thing. He's very worried about that. I mean, anyway.
We'll talk about cats. And Rand Paul, you've got on your show at 4.
I do. I got it prepped for him. I know he's worried about Kentucky bourbon. Which I haven't done that sort of thing in over 30 years.
I know, but I can school you on Kentucky bourbon.
And there are
in the
many
next
different
few minutes.
brands. We're going to lay all the brands out on
I'll
the
have to
screen.
explain the difference between
He's worried about tariffs.
straight bourbon whiskey and
You want to come in as a special guest to interview Rand Paul.
Sure.
By the way, Rand Paul's he's a personal friend of mine.
Yes.
I love the guy. He's terrific. I may not always agree with him, but he's a wonderful
been pushing
person.
for audits, and his father before him had
Loved
been
his
pushing for
father.
audits for decades.
I had interviews with his father when he was running for president on another network, shall we say, that were just priceless.
so you have to stay here, so you can't prep anywhere. You're with us this hour.
Yes, ma'am.